What if you knock me down? I'ma get on up. Top speed when you hit the ground. Just get on up when you get knocked down. Get on up. Bang! From the soul.
Good morning, Victory, 9 o'clock. How are we doing this morning? We feeling okay? Hey, if you don't know me, my name is Bryant, and I am the middle school and small groups pastor here. At 9 o'clock, you are like my family because you are the only service I ever really get to see on a normal weekend because we have middle school services at 6 p.m. and at Sunday at 11. So you guys are like family. So what's up, 9 o'clock? I'm really excited to hang out with you guys this morning. Hey, when I was going into the 6th grade, I was 11 years old, I sat down and I had a very serious conversation with my mother. And I remember I sat down at our dining room table, and I looked at my mom and I said, Mom, I think it's time you start letting me ride the bus. My whole entire elementary school career, my mom had taken me to school, and I really kind of secretly hated it because it felt like all of the cool kids in school got to ride the bus. And so I would get to school in the morning, and I'd say hi to all my friends, and they would all have all these inside jokes about all the stuff they were talking about on the bus, and I would feel left out, you know, like I'd get home in the afternoon, and I'd call them, and I'd be like, hey, do you want to hang out? And they'd be like, oh, sorry, we on the bus decided we were doing this thing, Bryant. And so I looked at my mom, and I was like, Mom, you are hampering my social game. All right, it is time you let me ride the bus. And my mom looked right at me and said, does that mean I get to sleep in the mornings? And I said, yeah. And she said, cool, you're riding the bus. And so I'll never forget my first day of 6th grade year. I put on my backpack. I walked out the door. I felt like a man. I was like, I am a man. I know I'm 11, and I know I'm like this tall, but my mom's letting me walk the 4 or 5 blocks to the bus. Like, I'm going to get on the bus by myself. All my friends are going to be really excited to see me. And so I walk the 4 or 5 blocks to the bus stop. I get on the bus in the morning. It's the greatest morning of my life. We're all joking, having fun. I finally feel like one of the cool kids. Everything was great. Get home that afternoon. Get off the bus. All of my friends go in one direction walking toward their houses. I have to walk by myself the 4 or 5 blocks home. So I was like, all right, it's cool. It's still sun out. You know, it's fine. I'm good. You know, I got my Ninja Turtles backpack on. Walking home. I'm cool. Like, I still feel like the man. I feel like the coolest person in the whole entire world. I'm 11 years old, but I am the man. My mom let me ride the bus. I finally won an argument with my mom, you know. And so I'm walking home. I'm super confident. I'm maybe 3 or 4 houses from my home. When all of a sudden, to my left, I hear this loud barking noise. And I turn to my left, and there's this huge, giant, monster dog running right at me, barking as loud as it can. And so I do what any man would do, and I scream like a little girl, and I run as fast as I can, literally as fast as I can to the other side of the road. I run so fast, I've got this heavy backpack on, that I actually trip over the curb on the other side, trying to get away from this dog. And so I trip, I hit the ground, I turn around, I brace myself for death, but it doesn't come. I open my eyes. This dog is still on the other side of the road, barking as loud as it can. It's tied up to this tree in the front yard. It's caught by its chain. You know, it's jerking as hard as it can to get me, but it can't get me. It's barking as loud as it can. Now, I don't speak dog, but I'm pretty sure it was saying, I'm going to eat you. I'm going to eat you. I'm going to eat you. So I get up as fast as I can. I put my backpack back on, and I do what any self-respecting man would do, and I run as fast as I can home. Like, I sprint as fast as I can. Like 11-year-old cardio was getting built that day. Like, I ran as fast as I could home. I dove inside of my house, it felt like. My mom was in the living room waiting for me, and she looked at me and she said, Brian, how was school? And I said, it was great. Mom, I can't ride the bus anymore. I can't ride the bus anymore. My mom looked at me and said, but why? Why can't you? Were so excited to ride the bus this morning. And I said, Mom, there was this giant dog. Like, I know when I say dog, you're probably thinking like normal-sized dog. Like, I can't prove this, but I promise this dog was the size of a bear. Like, it was huge. Like, Mom, there's this huge, bear-sized, giant Goliath of a dog out there, and I barely got past it today. And if I have to ride the bus tomorrow, I know he's going to eat me. My mom took one look at me and went, you're riding the bus tomorrow, son. And so I got up the next day, and the dog wasn't out in the mornings, thank goodness. Walked to the bus stop just fine, get on the bus just fine. I'm riding the bus home, And my friends they're all hanging out, they're all having fun. We're sitting in the back of the bus because that's where the cool kids sat. We're sitting in the back of the bus and they're all joking, they're having fun. And I'm just sitting in the back of the bus quiet like this, like rocking back and forth, because the only thing that I could think about was this giant dog that was waiting for me in this neighborhood. I couldn't get it out of my head. And so I was 11 at the time. I had never actually stepped foot inside of a church. I'm the only person in my family saved, but Lord willing, one day my parents will come to know Jesus, my brother and my sister too. I'd never been inside of a church. I just knew that when people were facing giants, when people were facing scary situations, they talked to God. That's all I knew. And so I'm sitting in the back of the bus, second day of school, my 6th grade year, and I remember I closed my eyes and I said this dumb 6th grade prayer, all right? I said this dumb 11-year-old prayer, and if you act like you've never said a prayer like this, you are lying, all right? I closed my eyes and I said, God, if you are real, don't let me get eaten by this dog today. That's all I said. It was real simple. God, if you are real, do not let me get eaten by this dog today, all right? If you want to prove to me that you exist, God, I will get to my home and I'll have all of my limbs still. Do you know what I mean? Like I will not be dead. And so I remember I got off the bus that day, and I started walking home, and the dog knew I was coming. I could hear it barking the second I got off the bus. And so what did I do? I crossed the road, so I wasn't on the same side of the road as the dog, and I sprinted past that house as fast as I possibly could. Got home safe, everything was good. My mom was like, how was school? It was great, I didn't die again. She was like, cool, you're riding the bus again tomorrow. And so third day came, I'm sitting on the bus and I'm thinking about this dog. It's the only thing I can think about is how scary this dog is. And I did the exact same thing that I did the day previous. I sat down and I went, all right, God, you got me through the dog yesterday. I'm still not 100% sure if you're real, God, but people say you're real and people say that you can protect us and people say that you can answer prayers. And so God, you got me past the dog yesterday, but I don't know if you're really, really, really real, you'll help me get past him today too. So I got off the bus, same thing, crossed the street, sprinted as fast as I could past this dog. This dog is barking, loud, scary, huge, almost taunting me as I run past it. As I'm running past it, I can almost hear it saying, I'm gonna get you tomorrow, I'm gonna get you tomorrow, I'm gonna get you tomorrow. Fourth day, the exact same thing. I say that little prayer on the bus, I run past the dog as fast as I can. Fifth day, the same thing. Finally, the next week. I remember it was Monday of the next week, and I was getting off the bus, and I was thinking to myself, man, the dog didn't get me last week. Maybe he won't get me today. And so I still crossed the street, but I didn't sprint past it. I walked past it at a pretty fast pace, but I still walked past it. Do you know what I mean? Like it was speed walking. The day after that, I crossed the street, but I walked past it. The day after that, I got off the bus, and I was like, man, that dog still hasn't gotten me. I bet I don't even have to cross the street. And so I'll never forget, it was the Wednesday of that following week. I walked past that dog on the exact same side of the street that it was on. And I'll never forget, like I was right here and the dog was that dog was right there, like barking as loud as it could, fighting against that chain. And I was terrified on the inside, but you know what? God hadn't let me get eaten before. He probably wasn't gonna let me get eaten today. And I remember I walked past it confident. The next day, I would like taunt the dog as I walked past. I was like, you're not gonna get me. Like, yeah, you're loud, but that chain is really strong. I'm good, you know? Something happened inside of me. Every single day that I survived that encounter with the dog, I was more confident that God would help me survive it tomorrow. Every single time God rescued me, I was more confident that he would rescue me the next day. Every single time. It's kind of like, do you remember the first time you got on a roller coaster? Anybody remember the first time you got on a roller coaster? Some people in this room are like, no, I've never been on a roller coaster. Well, the first time you get on a roller coaster, you are 100% convinced that this is the time the roller coaster is going to break down and catch on flames. Like, you just sit down in it and you're like, I know everybody's telling me it's safe. I know this coaster's been operating for 60 years and nobody has ever died on this roller coaster, but I've never been on this roller coaster, so today's the day, you know? But then you get off that roller coaster and you're like, I didn't die, and that was amazing. And so the next time you get on a roller coaster, you're not really thinking about the fear of death. You're really more excited about the thrill that you get to encounter as you live your life to the fullest, right? You know, it's kind of the same thing. Every single day and every single time I got past that dog, I became more confident that I would get past it the next time. Today, we're finishing up a series called Overcomer. And I don't know about you, but this series has been amazing this summer. Like, I've enjoyed every single week of this series. We've really been plugging in and discovering ways that God has designed us to be overcomers. If you didn't know this, God designed you to be an overcomer. He created you to overcome. He didn't create you to look at the obstacles and the difficulties of life and say you win. No, he created you to go out and tackle and conquer and defeat obstacles in your life. And today we're going to wrap up that series. The proof text, or the text that we've really really been in this whole entire summer has been 1 John chapter 5, verses 4 and 5. John says, "For whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is he who overcomes the world but he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God?" And so John in this passage, he says that if you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, if you believe that Jesus is the Messiah, if you believe that Jesus is the King, if you have a relationship with Jesus, if you are a Christ follower, you can overcome anything on the planet. You can overcome anything you encounter in this world, because no matter what you face, it's smaller than Jesus. And thank goodness he said that, right? Like, thank goodness that is true. Because I wish I could sit 11-year-old Bryant down. I wish I could be like, "Hey man, Ninja Turtles aren't going to be cool any longer. You should get a different backpack." All right? And then I wish I could say, 11-year-old Bryant, that barking dog is the only giant you're going to have to face in your life. But that wouldn't be true. I would be lying to 11-year-old Bryant, because the truth of the matter is, life is full of giants, right? Like, life is full of trials. Life is full of obstacles. Life is full of things that seem scary and seem like we can't tackle them. Life is full of these overwhelming giants in our lives. I wrote down a couple of examples. I think for a lot of us, and I have certainly had seasons in my life where this is true, I think a big giant in our lives is our finances, right? I think a huge giant in our lives can be our finances. Maybe every single month you sit down to pay bills and you're doing the math and it feels like a giant because you do the math 6, 7, 8 times and it doesn't come out right and you don't understand how you're going to make ends meet. Or maybe for you, your giant is the bill you get in the mail or the debt payment you get in the mail or that interest. Maybe, I know for me, there have been seasons in my life where my giant was a big interest rate that I was having trouble paying down. And you look at your finances and you're just like, "God, this looks like a huge giant that I do not know that I can tackle. Like, I don't know that I can get past this giant. God, if I'm going to get past this giant, I need your help," right? Or maybe for you, your finances are cool, but maybe for you, the giant in your life might be your marriage. I have been married to my amazing wife, Allison, almost 4 years. It'll be 4 years in October. And so I know our marriage is still a baby. Like, I know our marriage is still only 3 years old. Like, you still got to bring 5 or 6 outfits a day to take care of our marriage. Do you know what I mean? If our marriage was a kid, you know what I'm talking about? But this is what I know about marriage. I know that it can be tough. Like, I know it's the greatest thing in the whole entire world. Don't get me wrong. Like, being married is one of my favorite things in the whole entire world. But it can also be tough. And it requires intentionality. And it requires sacrifice. And to be married is to get up and look in the mirror every single day. It's to stare at your faults almost every single day. And so I know that sometimes, man, things just get off in our marriage. Maybe your marriage is your giant. Maybe there's some huge tension in your marriage right now that just feels like a giant that you can't get past. Maybe your giant in your life is the person you go to sleep next to every single night. And you wake up the next day and you're like, "I want our marriage to work. I want so badly for our marriage to work, but I just don't know how to make it happen." It feels like there's a giant in our marriage that we can't tackle. Maybe for you, your marriage isn't your giant. Maybe for you, your giant are your kids. I don't have kids yet. That's very intentional. I don't have kids yet, but one of the roles that I serve here is one of the youth pastors on staff, so I know your kids. All right, I don't have kids, but I know your kids. And so I know that kids can be giants in our lives. I know that sometimes raising kids can be difficult. It can be hard. It's not an easy thing. Kids, if you're in the room and you're sitting next to your parents, you need to know that they have a tough job, all right? Being your parent is not easy. And all the parents said amen. All right, it's not easy. But sometimes raising kids can be our giant, right? Especially in the world of Facebook. Because we get on Facebook or we get on Instagram and we see everybody else's kids. And everybody else's kids look perfect. And then we look at our kids and we're like, "Why aren't you like that?" You know what I mean? Like, why everybody else's kids look like angels? What happened to you? You know? And sometimes it can feel like a giant in our lives that we don't know how to tackle. We don't know how to get past. We don't know what to do. Maybe your giant isn't at home. Maybe your giant's at work. Maybe your giant's at work. You know, maybe you're at a job that you just feel like is a little bit above you. Or maybe can I get real here? Maybe your giant's your boss. You know what I mean? Maybe you come into work every single day and you know the person who sits in that corner office and you're like, "Oh gosh, you're awful. You know, like I can't get past you. I don't know what you want." Or maybe your giant is a project that you're working on that you feel like you can't get past. Students in the room, maybe your giant is math class. All right, maybe your giant is school. Maybe you sit down and you take a math test and you're like, "Why are there letters with numbers? This doesn't make sense." You know, maybe you feel like you can't get past it by yourself. Maybe your giant is your health. Maybe you've been dealing with something for a long time. Maybe you got a diagnosis this week, or maybe you've been dealing with something for 10, 15, 20 years. You feel like you can't get past this health issue in your life. You feel like it's this giant that is bigger than you, that's looming over you, that you can't defeat. Maybe the doctors don't know what's going on. Maybe you've taken 1,000 different treatments of medicine, and no medicine works, and the side effects just keep getting worse and worse, and you don't know how you're going to tackle it. You don't know how you're going to get past it. Or maybe I wrote down this last one. I think this is a really big one. Maybe your giant is just sin. Maybe there's a sin pattern in your life that you just feel like you can't get past, you can't defeat. Have you ever had that moment where you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, I'm never going to do that again? And then like 20 minutes later, you do that thing again, and you're like, oh, I said I was never going to do that again. And you feel like you just can't get past it. You feel like it's this giant that you can't defeat. The truth of the matter is we all have giants in our lives. What defines a person isn't whether or not they have difficulty. What defines a person isn't whether or not we have giants in our lives. It's how we handle those giants. Each and every single one of us, we're going to have difficult situations that we have to overcome. It's not a matter of when, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how we handle that in our lives. So how do we overcome the giants in our lives? As we wrap up this Overcomer series, how do we overcome the different things in our lives that feel like they're larger than life, that scare us, that we feel like we can't handle on our own? Some of you are already ahead of me. I think that one of the ways that we can really learn how to do this is to look at the most famous giant slayer in the whole entire Bible, a man by the name of David. A man by the name of David. David and Goliath is one of my favorite stories in the whole entire Bible, and it's one of my favorite stories for a lot of different reasons, some of the reasons that we're going to talk about today, but let me set the stage for you. All right, the story of David and Goliath takes place in the Valley of Elah. Now, I've never been to the Valley of Elah, but I've had people describe it to me. I want you to picture a field about 300 yards wide, and on either end of this field, there are two giant hills. And on these two giant hills were where the armies of the Philistines and the armies of the Israelites. Now, if you know anything about the Bible, if you've read the Bible, you know that the Philistines were almost always unanimously the bad guys in the Bible. And so the Philistines are on one side of this valley. They're on one of the hills. They're preparing for battle. They've got this huge army, and they're getting ready to fight the Israelites, who are on the other side on this other hill. And if you know anything about the Bible, you know the Israelites are always unanimously the good guys in the Bible. And so they've got this huge army, and they're getting ready to prepare to fight the Philistines. But neither side wants to move. Neither side wants to be the first one to strike. And this is why. Because if you know anything about war, you know that you never, ever want to try to attack somebody who has the high ground. So if the Israelites were going to attack the Philistines, they would have to climb down their hill, go 300 yards through this valley, climb up the Philistine hill, and try to take the hill. And yeah, they may win, but they're going to suffer incredible losses on the way there. And the same thing for the Philistines. If the Philistines are going to win this battle, they're going to have to crawl down their hill, go through the valley. The whole entire time, the Israelite archers are going to be shooting at them. They're going to have to come up the Israelite hill and try to take the battle. Again, they may win, but they're going to suffer incredible loss. So neither side wants to be the first to attack. They're in a stalemate. They have no idea what to do. They're locked. They could be there for a long time because neither side wants to be the first to fight. But the Philistines, they've got an ace up their sleeve. And so we pick up this story in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 4. It says, "Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. 9 feet tall. The Hawks could use a dude like that. He wore a bronze helmet, and his bronze coat of mail weighed 125 pounds. He also wore bronze leg armor and carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam." That would have been about this thick. Like picture a guy carrying a spear about this thick. It was tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. His armor bearer walked ahead of him carrying a shield. So this guy was so dangerous. This guy was so big. This guy was so strong that not only did he carry a bunch of weapons, he hired a second guy to carry more weapons for him. He was like, "Hey man, here's $20. I want you to carry my shield too, please." Like that's how big and amazing and terrifying, and this is how amazing of a warrior this guy was. It says that Goliath stood and shouted a taunt across to the Israelites. "Why are you all coming out to fight?" he called. "I am the Philistine champion, but you are only the servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, then we will be your slaves, but if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me." When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. So this was a old tradition that actually happened quite a bit in this time. They would call it the Contest of Champions. And the story of David and Goliath isn't the only historical reference point we have for this. You can actually read about this in a lot of old texts. In fact, if you read the Iliad written by Homer, he actually writes about different scenarios where this would happen. If two armies were about to fight each other, and if both of those armies were really worried about the losses that they were going to suffer, the two commanders could agree on this thing called the Contest of Champions. And basically what would happen is one army would select their champion, the other army would select their champion, and they would send those two champions into one-on-one battle, and whoever won, that army would be declared the victor, and the other army would have to be slaves to that first army. This was a very common thing that would happen back in those days. And so the Philistines, they send out Goliath, and Goliath is 9 feet tall. He's wrapped head to toe in armor. He's got a spear this big, like this thick. He's got a second dude that follows him around carrying weapons. Goliath crawls down into this valley, stands in the middle of this valley, looks up at the Israelite army and says, "Hey, I'm the Philistine champion. Which one of you guys want to fight me?" And nobody moves on the Israelite side of the camp. No one moves. Everyone is terrified. They have never, ever seen a warrior like this before. They've never seen anybody this big. They've never seen anybody this scary. They have never seen a giant like this before in their lives. Nobody wants to move. Saul, the commander of the Israelite army, has no idea what to do. And this continues. The Bible says that for 40 days, every morning and evening, the Philistine champion strutted in front of the Israelite army. I love that the writer of Samuel uses the word strutted, because that just describes how arrogant and how confident Goliath was. And why wouldn't he be? Chances are he had never ever met a man as big and as terrifying as he was. And so he had every single right in the world to be arrogant. He had every single right in the world to be confident in his abilities. So for 40 days and for 40 nights, every single morning, the Israelite army would be awoken by this giant who would stand before them in the valley and say, "Hey, one of you has to come fight me right now." And the Israelites had no idea what to do. They were terrified. They were scared. They were paralyzed with fear. And then David enters the story. And I love the way that David enters the story, because David doesn't enter the story as a warrior. David doesn't enter the story as the king. Sometimes we read about David in the story and we think to ourselves, he's king. He's not king yet. David actually enters the story as a shepherd. It says in 1 Samuel 17, verse 17, it says, "One day Jesse said to David," Jesse was David's dad, "Take this basket of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread and carry them quickly to your brothers." So David's 3 older brothers, they were at the battlefield. They were a part of the Israelite army. And Jesse made David stay home to be shepherd over his flock. Now, when we read the word shepherd, when we talk about being a shepherd in our kind of Western context, in our modern context in the church, I feel like we put the title shepherd on like a high plane. You know, we read the word shepherd and we're like, "Oh, David was a shepherd. Like, he must have been amazing. Like, he must have been so cool. He must have been so blessed to be a shepherd," because the Bible describes Jesus as a shepherd, right? But that actually wasn't the case. Back in those times, if you were a shepherd, it's because people didn't think you could do anything else. If you were a shepherd, it's because people didn't believe you could be in the army. It's because people didn't believe you could be in government. It's because people didn't believe you could be a scholar. Being a shepherd was really low on the totem pole in the job world of the Israelites back then. And so David wasn't a shepherd because there were sheep to watch. David was a shepherd because his dad didn't think he could handle war. His dad didn't think he was ready. His dad didn't think he was good for it. But you know what, David, your older brothers need to eat. And so I made them some packed lunches. I got them some Lunchables. You know what I mean? I got them some Capri Suns. All right, I need you to take this food to your brothers on the front lines. And so David does it. He takes his brother's food. David was the original Uber Eats. He takes food to his brothers. And I love kind of what happens here, because we can kind of infer from the story exactly what happens here. David gets there, he delivers his food to his brothers, and he's confused. Like, he gets to the battlefield, and he's like, why isn't there a battle happening here? Like, we're at war. Shouldn't people be fighting? You know, the Israelite army is frozen. They've been frozen for 40 days. They have no idea what's going on. And so David starts to ask questions. He's like, "Hey, why isn't anybody fighting? Like, what's going on?" And he hears whispers and rumors of this Goliath dude. You know, "Hey, who's Goliath? Like, what's going on? Why aren't we fighting?" And I picture in my head that David's actually present for when Goliath comes out. And so Goliath comes out and he begins to taunt the Israelites like he's done for 40 days. You guys aren't good enough. Your God is a fake. You can't defeat us. And David sees this guy and he goes, what's going on? Why is no one taking care of this? Are you going to go fight him? Do you want to go fight him? Like, who's going to go fight this guy? Somebody has to go fight this guy. Somebody's got to take care of him. We can't just let him come out here and taunt us like this. And we can't just let him come out here and taunt our God like this. Like, we have to do something. And nobody's moving. Nobody's moving. So David starts saying some ridiculous stuff. If nobody else wants to take care of this guy, I'll do it. Hey, if none of you warriors want to handle this giant, I'll take care of it. I'll go do it. Hey, if nobody else is going to get into this valley and tackle this giant, send me. I'll take care of it. And this causes an uproar. This causes a riot in the ranks of the Israelite army. It'd be like, picture you order Jimmy John's or you order Papa John's for lunch, right? And the delivery guy shows up at your work, delivers the food, then awkwardly kind of hangs out and then starts telling you how to do your job. Like, that's basically what David had done. And so the warriors, they're mad. They're frustrated. They're like, what is David talking about? David, you're just some dude's annoying little brother. Go home. It causes such an uproar that it actually gets to the king. It gets to the commander. It gets to Saul. And it's such a big deal that Saul knows he has to take care of it. He's got to shut David up. And so the king, the commander, calls for David. He says, David, come here. And so David is hanging out. He's at the battlefield. Some people come and collect David and escort him into the war room of the king. So David's not just in front of the king, he's probably in front of all of the commanders of the Israelite army. He's surrounded by the brass. He's surrounded by the strategic minds that are helping Saul fight this battle. And I love what David says. It says in 1 Samuel 17:32, it says, this is David talking. He says, don't worry about this Philistine, David told Saul. I'll go fight him. So David is surrounded by all these big commanders, these strategic minds. He's staring at the king commander of his country. And he's so audacious. He's so bold. He says, hey, don't worry about this giant. I got him. And this must have blown Saul away. Like, this must have blown all of the commanders away. Like, I picture there, like, the room just got real quiet. Everybody started looking at each other like, did he just say what I think he said? Like, everybody's freaking out. And Saul is completely floored, because of course he is. He has warriors that have been trained from birth. He's got killing machines on this army. And the only person who's willing to go fight Goliath is this 15, 16, 17-year-old boy. Saul is beyond himself. He can't understand this. And so Saul says this, he says, don't be ridiculous. There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth. Again, most scholars think that David would have been in between the ages of 15 and 17 in this. So David is a teenager. He's a boy. And Saul looks at him and says, are you kidding me? Have you seen that giant out there? Like, he's been trained for war since his youth. You can't do this, David. You're not good enough. You're not strong enough. There's no way you can win. I don't know about you, but I know for me, sometimes when I come face to face with a giant in my life, I have those exact same thoughts. Brian, have you seen that giant? Like, you can't tackle that giant. It's too big. It's too beyond you. Like, you can't handle this financial issue. You can't handle this health issue. You can't handle this family issue. Like, you can't do this thing at work. Like, have you seen how big and crazy and scary that is? Like, you're just a kid, Brian. Like, you can't do this. Sometimes it's not me. Sometimes there's another voice back there. Like, we have an enemy who knows exactly when to say the right things to us. You know what I'm talking about? And sometimes it's the whisper of the enemy, and he goes, Bryant, like, you can't do that, man. You're not strong enough. You're not smart enough. You're not handsome enough, man. You're not old enough. You're not wise enough. Bryant, you are not good enough to do this. I think we all have those voices in our head sometimes when we look at a giant. And when we hear those voices, we can do one of two things. We can listen to them, and we can stay paralyzed like the Israelite army was paralyzed, and we can never, ever get rid of the giants in our lives. Or we can respond the way that David responded. I love the way that David responds in this passage. It's one of my favorite pieces of scripture in the whole entire Bible because it is so ridiculous and so amazing. It says, but David persisted. He said, I have been taking care of my father's sheep and goats. When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and I rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and I club it to death. I've done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do this to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defiled the armies of the living God. And then I love this last line. All right, if you get one thing from this passage this morning, I want you to grab a hold of this last line. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear yesterday will rescue me from this Philistine today. So David was a shepherd. And one of a shepherd's responsibilities was to protect his flock, protect it from predators. Now, when we think about predators in a Western context, we're thinking about coyotes, worst case, wolves. But in David's context, when he was thinking about predators, he thought about bears and lions. Now, I don't know about you, but if I've got 100 sheep, if I'm hanging out in the field and I see a lion come and grab one of my sheep, I'm probably thinking to myself, 99 out of 100 ain't bad. Like, I'm good. Lion, I've got plenty of sheep. You can have your one. We're cool here, all right? We're good. But that's not David. David was a faithful and caring shepherd. And so I picture it's David's first day on the job as shepherd. And the Bible says that David would sing songs of worship to God as he waited out in the field. And so David, he was hanging out. He was probably singing songs of worship. I don't know. Maybe he was singing Oceans. I don't know. He was hanging out. And he sees a lion come, and a lion grabs one of his sheep. And it's common for a predator to not kill and eat on sight. Normally what a predator will do is a predator will take its prey to a secluded place far away from other predators and scavengers, and there it'll dine. And so David watches this lion take one of his sheep, and he knows he's only got a couple of minutes to catch up to this lion and save this sheep, so he grabs his staff and he takes off running after this lion. And as he's running after this lion, there are probably a couple of thoughts that are in his mind. He's probably thinking things like, I'm a fool. This is the day I die. What am I doing? You know, I'm going to be eaten by a lion. And he's sprinting after the sheep, and then he begins to have this inner conversation with himself and this inner conversation with God. He begins to say to himself, God, if you don't show up right now, I'm going to be eaten by a lion. Like, God, if you do not show up right now, not only am I going to look like a fool, all right, my dad's going to tell tales of the son he had who got eaten by a lion. Like, God, I need you to show up today. Like, I'm not going to give up. You have called me to be faithful to this role as shepherd. You have called me to protect these sheep. All right, God, so I'm going to do my job. I really need you to do your job right now. And so I picture David, he catches up to this lion. He pulls the sheep out of the lion's mouth. The lion turns on David. I love what the Bible says. The Bible says that David would grab the lion by the mouth and club it in the face with his staff. All right, the lion is hurt. The lion stumbles off out of the way. And David, he stands there having saved the sheep amazed. Not in his own abilities, but amazed in the way that his God showed up and rescued him. So day 2 on the job. David's hanging out with his sheep again, singing songs of worship to Jesus. And a bear comes out of nowhere, grabs one of his sheep, takes off running. David takes off sprinting after this bear, and he's thinking in the back of his mind, man, bear, really scary, but God, yesterday you helped me defeat a lion. Today you're going to help me defeat a bear. Yesterday you rescued me from the lion. God, you are faithful, and you are the same yesterday, today, and forever. Today you're going to help me beat this bear. So David, he catches up to the bear, hits it with his club, saves the sheep. He's a hero again. Third day, the same thing. Lion or a bear, he sprints after it. He's thinking to himself, yesterday and the day before, David, God, you rescued me. All right, you were my rescuer yesterday. You were my rescuer the day before. Today you can be my rescuer again. Catches up to the predator, kills it, gets his sheep back. He does this again and again and again. What this does is it builds confidence in David. It builds confidence in the faithfulness of his God, that the God who rescued him yesterday will rescue him today. And so you fast forward to this conversation with Saul, and David looks right at the king, and he says, hey, the God who rescued me from the lions and the bears yesterday will rescue me from this giant today. The God who rescued me from the lion and the bear yesterday will help me defeat this giant today. And this blows Saul away. And I don't know if Saul was just desperate. I don't know if Saul just had no other options. I bet his war chiefs are confused. They're freaking out. They're like, Saul, he's a kid. You can't let a kid be our champion, because if he loses, we all have to be slaves to the Philistines. But eventually Saul is like, fine, you want him, go get him, kid. And so the Bible tells us that David, he takes his sling, and a lot of us, we picture a sling like this, but that's not actually the sling he would have used in this context. He actually would have had one of these guys, the ones that you had to wave above your head and spin up to let loose. It would have taken an incredible amount of skill and practice to be able to use one of these. David didn't just have faith, he put his faith into action. It would have taken a ton of skill to use one of these. Now, the Bible says that David also collected stones, and for whatever reason in our context, when we think of these stones, we picture like pebbles. But most scholars don't think that's what he grabbed. In fact, most scholars think that he would have had to find stones that were the size of softballs in order to do the proper amount of damage to put down a man. And so David would have spent some time looking around and preparing himself and putting his faith in action, finding those stones. The Bible says that once David had been prepared, he would climb down into the valley of Elah, and I can't imagine what that moment must have been like, because the rest of the Israelites must have been quiet. Like, it must have been dead silent, because they were all thinking to themselves right now, my fate is in the hands of this boy. And the Philistine army must have been loving it, because the Philistine army was looking out, and they expected this warrior to come fight their warrior, and here was this 16, 17-year-old kid stumbling down the hill with a sling. They were like, that's the best you've got, Israelites? Are you kidding me? And so David, he walks into the valley of Elah, and he comes face to face with his giant, and Goliath is having a field day. Like, Goliath cannot believe that this is who the Israelite army sent. Goliath looks right at David and goes, are you kidding me? Like, this is the best you guys have? Like, don't you see that I'm a giant? I'm 9 feet tall. Like, I've never been defeated in battle. Like, I have so many weapons. I have a second guy who carries weapons for me. Like, do you guys want to do a do-over? Because I don't think this is fair. Like, I'm going to kill this kid, and then you guys are all going to be our slaves, and it's going to be your fault because you sent this kid to come fight me. Goliath is so confident that he starts mocking the Israelites again. And more than that, he starts mocking their God. This is who your God sends to fight me? And David is done. He's done with Goliath. And you know the end of the story. The Bible says that David takes one of his stones, he whips up his sling, he sends it flying, he defeats the giant. He overcomes the giant. And the Israelite army cannot believe what they have just seen. The 16, 17-year-old kid defeated Goliath. In fact, they are so excited about this that the Bible says they chase down the Philistine army, and they do away with the Philistine army that day. David is this amazing giant slayer. So how does this affect our lives? What do we get out of this story? How can you and I learn to overcome our giants from this story? I think that David does two things in this story that I think that if we grab a hold of these two things, you and I can really begin to overcome giants the same way that David overcame giants. The first thing that we have to do is we have to learn to think the way that David thought. We have to learn to think the way that David thought. See, David saw the world a whole lot different than anybody else saw the world. And I think that if we can learn to see life through the lens that David learned to see life through, I think that we can stand a better chance against our giants. We can overcome the giants in our lives. David had this God will rescue me mindset. And David knew something that I think is really important for us to know. David knew something that the writer of Hebrews would write thousands of years later. Hebrews 13 says this. It says that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. God never changes. God is faithful. His character is always faithful, never changes. God is the only thing in this existence that doesn't change. Everything else changes. People change, our jobs change, cities change, situations change, our health can change. God never changes. He is always the same. Yesterday, today, and forever. And so David knew that if God was my rescuer yesterday with the lion and the bear, God can be my rescuer today with this giant. Because he knew that God never, ever changed. If God is a rescuer yesterday, God is a rescuer today, right? The truth of the matter is God has rescued each and every single one of us. If you're anything like me, God has rescued me millions of times, probably. God has rescued me in situations where I didn't even know I needed being rescued. Like, I'm sure one day when I get to heaven and I come face to face with Jesus Christ, I'm going to be like, hey, man, thank you so much for rescuing me 1,001 times. And he's going to be like, 1,001 times? Dude, I rescued you 1,000,001 times, you know? And he's going to show me all these things that I didn't even know he was rescuing me from, right? Like, God is a rescue. And if you're sitting in this room and if you can't think of a time where God has rescued you, you can't think of a time where Jesus Christ has stepped in and intervened in your life, I'm going to give you a really big one. What about the cross? What about the cross? See, before the cross, you and I, if we were alive before Jesus Christ's sacrifice on the cross for us, before that moment, you and I, we were enslaved to sin and death. Like, we were bound by it. We were prisoners to it. And then Jesus. Because when he died for us on the cross, He broke the chains of sin and death over our lives. He rescued us from darkness. He reached down and pulled us out of the dark waters. He rescued us on the cross. See, a lot of us, we think that the cross is God's ultimate symbol of his rescuing power in our lives. And don't get me wrong, it is an amazing symbol of his rescuing power in our lives, but it's not the only time he has rescued us. It's not like Jesus rescued us on the cross, went up to heaven, and then said, "You got life, man." That's not what Jesus did. In fact, Jesus rescued us on the cross so he could be in our lives today to rescue us today in our everyday situations. I wrote it down, I say it like this: the victorious Jesus on the cross yesterday is victorious in your life today. It's not two different gods, it's not two different Jesuses. The exact same Jesus who conquered sin and death on the cross yesterday is in your life today and can help you at work. The same cross who conquered sin and death, or the same Jesus who conquered sin and death on the cross yesterday, is in your family right now. The same powerful Jesus who died for us on the cross yesterday can help you raise your kids today. It's the same victorious Jesus because he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. We have to remember the rescuing God of our past. Because when we remember the rescuing God of our past, we can be confident that that exact same rescuing God is in our present and will be in our future. We have to think the way that David thought. David knew that the God who rescued him yesterday could rescue him today. The same Jesus who helped you get into school can help you pass your classes. The same Jesus who got you out of darkness can help save your marriage. The same Jesus who created you can heal you. The same Jesus who blessed you with kids can help you raise them. Man, the same Jesus that broke sin and death can break sin and death inside of you. He's the same rescuing Jesus. We have to think the way that David thought. And then the second thing that we have to do is we have to act the way that David acted. We have to learn to act the way that David acted. See, David didn't just have the right mindset, he had the right actions too. David didn't just remember all the times that Jesus rescued him and then sat on the hill and waited for God to defeat Goliath. Like, that would have been ridiculous, right? No, David remembered all the times that God rescued him and then put action behind that faith. He grabbed his sling, which he had learned to use over years of being a shepherd. He went out and he found these stones that probably wouldn't have been easy to find. He stepped down into the valley of Elah with all the Israelites whispering behind him that he couldn't do it and with the Philistines laughing ahead of him. He put action behind his faith. I think a lot of us, we're okay with the first step. We're totally cool admitting that God is a rescuing God and knowing that without him we can't do anything. But I think some of us, we get stuck on the second step, which means that we have to actually do something about it. We have to step out in faith. We have to be men and women who prove our faith with our actions. James 2:4 says this. It says, "What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone?" Another translation says that faith without works is dead. See, what you and I believe isn't what we say we believe. Anybody can say that they believe anything. No, the ultimate proof of what we believe is what we do. Our actions are the ultimate proof of what we believe. And I think David was so good at that. David looked at the king and he said, "I believe that my God can rescue me." And then he put his money where his mouth is and he stepped out into the valley of Elah. He stepped out and he faced the giant. We have to learn to not just have faith in Jesus, we have to learn to act on that faith as well. We got to step out and say, "God, I believe that you're going to move, and because I believe you're going to move, I'm going to step up to my giants and face them. I'm going to put myself in situations where, God, if you don't show up, I'm going to look like a fool." See, David didn't just see a giant in the valley of Elah. He saw an opportunity for his God to show off. He saw an opportunity for God to be glorified. He saw an opportunity for him to prove not just to the Philistines, but to the rest of his fellow Israelites that his God is real and powerful and rescuing. And he put action behind his faith. So what does this look like in our lives? If your giant is the giant of finances, and if you're doing the math over and over again and it just doesn't make sense, and you just don't know how you're going to make ends meet, and you're just not sure how you're going to make things happen this month, and you can't get past this debt, or you can't get past this giant of finances. Let me ask you this: what action are you putting toward that faith? Are you tithing? Are you being faithful to what God has called you to be with your finances? Are you talking to Jesus about your money? Some of us, we're probably sitting in here like, "Brian, I'm too broke to tithe." I don't know about you, I'm too broke not to tithe. all right? Like, I need God's help in my finances. Like, faith plus action. Are you taking financial classes that we offer here? Are you really doing everything you can to take steps out to say, God, I want to defeat this giant in my life, but I need your help to do it? Maybe your giant is the giant of marriage. You know, maybe you feel like there's this this tension in your marriage that you can't get past. Let me ask you this. Have you talked to your small group leader about it? You know, have you sought out counsel? Have you plugged into Married Forever or Married Life, some of the marriage programs that we have here at the church, some of the things that we offer a million things for married couples here to really plug in and make their marriage the best that it can possibly be. It's not enough just to sit back and be like, God, I believe that you can rescue my marriage. Like, we have to believe that, and then we have to step out in faith and do things about it. Maybe your giant is the giant of your kids. Maybe you just cannot understand why your kids do not know Jesus. You cannot understand why your kids aren't getting it. You don't know why your students or your kids aren't looking like everybody else's students and kids. Let me ask you, like, what are you doing about it? Like, you can have faith that God can rescue your kids, but are you stepping in that faith? Are you being intentional parents? You know, are you spending one-on-one time with them? Are you present when you're home, or do you get home from work and check out? I'm a youth pastor, so I feel like I can say this. Are your kids plugged into the youth ministry here at Victory? Are they plugged into the youth ministry here at Victory? Because we would love nothing more than to be a second voice in your kids' lives to help them walk in the way of Jesus. We want so badly to do that. But Brian, my kids got football. My kids got soccer. My kids got fencing. That's awesome. Cool. That's really, really cool. Can I get real here? Last time I checked, football never got anybody to heaven. You know what I mean? Like last time I checked, that's not the way it worked. I'm not saying your kids have to quit school or quit sports, but if you look at your kids and if you know that sports are getting in the way of them reaching Jesus, you as a parent, you got to make a decision there. You got to not just have faith, but you got to step into that faith and put action behind that faith and say, my kids are going to know Jesus. My kids are going to grow up to be mature, contributing members of the society, and I'm going to have faith that the God who rescued me yesterday can rescue my kids, and I'm going to do something about it. Maybe your giant is your health. You know, maybe you have this nagging thing that you can't get rid of. It's one thing to have faith. It's one thing to wake up every morning and be like, God, I know you can heal me, but what actions are you putting forth behind that? You know, young people, are you going to bed at a good time? You know what I mean? Like, are you eating well? If you've been dealing with something chronically for a while, have you told a leader? The Bible says that if you're sick, to come before the elders of the church. That doesn't necessarily mean the pastors. It can mean your small group leader. It can mean somebody that you look up to spiritually. Have you gone up to them and said, hey, I need prayer. I've got this thing that I'm dealing with. Every single weekend, at the end of every single message, we have prayer leaders up here at the front that are ready to pray for people. Have you come up and gotten prayer? Faith plus action. Maybe your giant is a sin issue. It's a sin pattern. It's a sin thing that you can't kick. Maybe you just can't stop looking at the wrong things on the internet. And you have faith. You know that God can rescue you from this sin because you've read the Bible and you know that he defeated sin and death. Let me ask you this. What actions have you put forth on that? Have you confessed that sin to anyone? You know, if you can't stop looking at things on your computer, do you have blocks and filters on your computer? You know, maybe it's your phone. Maybe your phone's getting you into trouble. Maybe for a season, you just need to put your iPhone away and you need to go back to the old flip phone that you can't get on the internet on. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, but Brian, what about Twitter? What about Facebook? Hey, all that stuff is great, but again, Facebook's not going to get you to heaven. Like, maybe you need to take a season. Like, how badly do you want to get rid of the sin issue in your life? It's one thing to have faith, but what action are you going to put behind that? Because it's faith plus action that allows us to overcome our giants. We have to think the way that David thought, and we have to learn to act the way that David acted. David saw a giant, and he saw an opportunity for God to show off. He knew that the God who rescued him yesterday could rescue him today, and then he put action behind that faith. Let me ask you this. What would your life look like if you weren't paralyzed by your giants? How would your life change if when you saw a difficulty, if you saw a difficult situation, or if you saw something you had to overcome, if you saw an unfortunate circumstance in your life, how would your life change when you saw one of those things? You didn't just see a giant you couldn't get past. You saw an opportunity for God to show off in your life. How would your life change if you sat down, when next time you faced a giant, if you sat down and you thought to yourself, now God rescued me yesterday, he can rescue me today. Okay, now what action do I need to take to make that happen? I think a lot of us, we'd get unstuck. I think a lot of us, we would begin to live a more victorious life. I think a lot of us, we would get past the giants that have been hounding us for years. Faith plus action.